These are the transformative novels I read in the month of July. And right now I am here to encourage you, yes, you, to read them so that we can kick off a literary renaissance. Because if there is going to be a literary awakening, we are going to have to start reading real books again. So many booktubers are recommending trash and fluff that will do nothing to change your soul. But here on Right Conscious, I only recommend soul-bending works that will elevate you to the descendant or the transcendent. And so if that is what you are interested in, then this is the place for you. And hey, screw this intro. Let's start talking about some books. So the first two books I read in the month of July were by one of the greatest female novelists of the 20th century, Clarice Lispector. And those two novels are The Hour of the Star and Agua Viva. And I just want to say really fast, and this is going to be a controversial statement. So many of you guys are going to leave after this, but I believe that men and women most of the time have different strengths in writing. And it's smart to capitalize on those, especially in this dried up market where no one is reading real literature anymore. And I am on Substack. I used to be on Tumblr and in the blog world back in the day. And when I was reading these two works, I was astounded by Lispector's genius, by her ability to bring this kind of modern stream of consciousness that is beyond Virginia Woolf, beyond even many of the early male modernist writers, and make it feel real, make it feel important, make it emotional. And when I think of, or I should say, when I read contemporary stream of consciousness explorations of emotions in life done by female authors, mostly for free on Substack, I am usually not very impressed. I'll just be honest here. Usually it's just some trash from the chick who was good at writing in high school, took AP Lit, did some got a humanities degree, and here she is on her second win. And there are a million logic bros doing the same thing on the male side of things too. But I personally believe in literary traditions. I believe that as authors, we should be looking back at figures in the past and saying, I am going to be their successor. I'm going to stand on their shoulders and not do the same stuff, but I'm the next person in line. Nobody does that anymore. It's something that we should all be conscious of because it's how the top performers in almost every other field function. They study the person that came before them, especially who has a similar style to what they are doing, then remix it and then take it to the next level. And when people say writing sucks today, what they actually mean is that people are good at writing. There are a ton of good writers out there, but we haven't taken many of these lineages that have been going on since the Greeks, if not since Homer, some for just 50 years or 500 years, to the next level. Because through brute force, through just your intellect or being talented or whatever, going to MFA programs, you can become a good writer. I know a ton of good writers, but one of the fastest shortcuts to greatness is combining effort, talent, and knowledge from the past. And so what's interesting is that I got into Clarice Lispector because all my favorite female writers and female thinkers, I should say, in the literary world, whether that is my wife, Laura, these are just random people from Substack, Bianca, Marilyn, Steffi, I could just go on with people who I follow on Substack who are good writers in my estimation. And I feel like they're doing different things and trying to evolve and stuff. They all love her. And so then when I read, I was like, oh, this is the potential, or I could say the standard, that this beautiful feminine writing can achieve. This stream of consciousness, like I said, started with Jane, even the interiority of Jane Austen, the restraint she shows in Mansfield Park, all of that, Mary Shelley, like that lineage. And then, especially from Virginia Woolf on, can be something really powerful. Doesn't need to be this woe is me interiority bleh fest, which is kind of turned into. It can actually activate you. And so we have two novels over here. Both are metafictional. Agua Viva, very more so. Agua Viva is basically a compilation of just crazy philosophical literary thoughts that are beautiful, just strung together into this novel. There is a sense of coherence to it, but it isn't a typical novel. The Hour of the Star, which is down below, is more of a metafictional exploration of this author writing about this girl, and it's kind of this weird play, but it's got some of the better writing on women and the experience of women in poverty, and the erasure of women through capitalism that I've ever seen. Like, really good stuff. And it isn't sentimental. It isn't what I would call woke. It's not really trying to make you feel anything. It's trying to bring your consciousness into contact with the present, which in my opinion is the most powerful thing to do. Clarice Lispector is a GOAT, has risen in reputation on my list very much lately, because I've realized that what are we saying? People online are like, oh, gotta stop doom scrolling, gotta be more present. I'm more present now. I've set boundaries. Stop gaslighting me. And I have male friends and female friends who act like that. It's so funny. But people are trying to find presence. We're all trying to find more contact with reality, or should, the phenomenology of ontology, the beingness of being. And you can do that through literature. That's what Basho, Li Po, Han Shan, the Chinese and Eastern poets were doing for a long time. And it's something we never really figured out in the West. We figured out how to make contact with God through literature, the Jewish God, and that kind of energy field very well. You could talk about Paradise Lost and the Dante's Inferno, all of that stuff. Beautiful. So many other works. We also have done a great job of like the exploration of interiority in with Dostoevsky and Proust and all that. Like, we're masters of that. But when it comes to being, modernist poets like Ezra Pound and Robinson Jeffers figured that out. But in terms of literature, it's a little bit more elusive. And it's somewhat hard, because how do you write about contact with the present moment for 100,000 words? It's kind of hard to do. But these two novels over here, especially Agua Viva, but actually both of them really kind of show that. It really kind of opened pathways in my mind to what is possible in fiction in a transformative way. Because when I talk about transformation and novels that transform you, there's a hierarchy there of, potency. There's a hierarchy of transformation. Like, you could sit and go on a walk and, that will get you in some form of shape. Or you could walk 10,000 steps a day, be in a caloric deficit, sprint, and do all these other things. There are rankings to everything, technically. There is a hierarchy in many things, if not everything. And in terms of hierarchies, the Right Conscious Book Club is the best book club anywhere online. We read anywhere from 6 to 10 novels every single month and meet up every single weekend to talk about them. I also have literature courses, writing courses, my own writing, motivational videos, and live streams, and a ton of other stuff over on my Substack. And so this is what the Substack looks like. I put out daily content, sometimes paid, sometimes free. Here's a 50-minute video on how to translate poetry for free. Here are, the book clubs we are doing. There are so many going on. I have the schedule for the next couple months up. Here are some of the courses we are doing. I have a Cormac McCarthy course, a David Foster Wallace course. I've done some book breakdowns over there that are almost all over an hour long. And here are some of the other course selections, like a poetry, fiction, sentence structure course, and a bunch of other cool stuff. And so if you are a writer, you need to be on Substack. If you are a reader, you need to be on Substack. Even if it's not on my Substack, is where the best readers and writers in the world are at right now. And so if you guys want to support me and my mission of creating a literary renaissance, a free or paid subscription over there would mean the world to me. And I hope to give you overwhelming value with videos that are way too meta or controversial for YouTube. Plus, you can talk to me on live streams or in the book club a couple times a week. And so thanks for listening, and let us now hop back to the video. The link is down in the description below if you want to join. And it's the same could be said about literature, especially for global audiences. For instance, I was talking this about, we're about to talk about a little bit later on in this video, the Brothers Karamazov, which I read this month, reread, I should say. And I have a deep affinity toward Christianity, just because I am a big reader and I love knowledge. I am not a Christian, but I was raised Christian for a while and started to study it seriously, over the past 13 years, and grappled with the ideas and lived like a Christian, thought like it, like really tried to feel and be like, okay, this is what all this means. And so when I hear the Grand Inquisitor rant in Brothers Karamazov, or him grappling with these ideas, it's effective for me because it's playing on things that matter to me. But I've known plenty of people who aren't Christians who have read the Brothers Karamazov and not really liked it. I mean, they like it and they're like, this is good, this is cool, crazy book, very, very good. But they don't really get it. They aren't transformed by it, which has always interested me in the sense that the highest level of book is a book that could be given to a Hindu, a Christian, an atheist, or whoever, and be able to transform them. And one of the highest, or I should say, one of the most potent transformative tools is awareness, is present moment awareness, and being able to be in that no matter what no matter what type of person or religion you are in. And so it's interesting that in Western literature we don't have as much of that. We have Proust ranting about memories, though. He's not in the present moment awareness. It's all this nostalgia. And so yeah, I would recommend these two. I would check these two out. Like I said, I'll make a tier ranking list for transformative tropes, but present moment awareness is at the top, if not, in the top 5 for sure. And so, boom, Clarice Lispector, one of the GOATs. And I think that if you are a female author, that this is someone who people should be trying to succeed. People who have strengths and, who have the power of femininity within them. That's who I would be looking toward. And like I said, I'm seeing results from people who are tapping into her. And so moving forward, next I read A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And I am a huge lover of Ernest Hemingway. I used to be a Hemingwayian and went to a Hemingway conference in Cook City and Wyoming. And I'm a big fan of his work because Hemingway, in terms of lineages, is one of the masters of unconscious symbolism. You guys have all heard before of the iceberg theory that, Hemingway writes all minimal because everything is kind of hidden beneath it. But it's actually true. And it's actually one of the main, and when we're talking about literary fiction, what makes literary fiction great? I was actually emailing with a friend of mine today about this. It's only a couple things. And I was just talking about one. Being able to do crazy interiority or stream of consciousness stuff is one. Being able to do unconscious symbolism is one. Having beautiful style, purple prose, explosions with style is another. And I could go on, but there's not too many. But in a novel, most great books only, all of them do everything decently, but they really shine in certain elements. And the same is true with authors. Many authors write the same thing or play on the same strengths over and over and over again. It's a really smart idea. You don't see Kobe Bryant hitting new moves. He does the same move that he's practiced and gotten really good at. And mature writers who actually succeed, figure out early on what that stuff is and then just make it happen. And you pray to God that your strengths are in trends during the time, or you can get those across in the right way. Because I've known writers who have strengths, and for whatever reason, their strengths plus their kind of life plus their content don't equal to something good. It's just a bad combo. And it's kind of a sad reality. And obviously you can change things, but your strengths are your strengths, and turning writing weaknesses into strengths is a 5 to 10 year endeavor. And I've seen authors do it before, and it is possible. But anyway, so Hemingway is a connoisseur of unconscious symbolism. And A Farewell to Arms is a story basically about Hemingway's trauma and what he went through in World War I. Because Hemingway had 2 wounds in his life. The first being that his mother dressed him as a girl and made him be called Ernie until he was like 8 years old. His mom made him try to be a girl because she was fucking psychotic. And being raised in Illinois or wherever he was at around there during the early 1900s and being dressed as a girl and being sent to play with the boys, how do you think that went? I know we're supposed to all be like inclusive in schools now, and things have gotten better. I'm a high school English teacher, but the weird kids or kids that are experimenting with their style in whatever way, whether that's with gender or a mohawk or whatever, they get made fun of still. There's pushback, but we're pretty open-minded today. I can only imagine the pushback you would get 100 years from now. And we have every single wall in my classroom has some suicide hotline, anti-bullying hotline available, and I have to report things immediately. Back in the day, your teacher was the one kicking your ass. Anyway, so Hemingway went through a lot. And, that obviously creates a crisis in masculinity when you were emasculated as one of your first memories. But beyond that, he wasn't allowed to join the war. So he joined the Italian Red Cross ambulance service and was wounded in war and actually received a Fisher King wound in the groin and leg area. And we don't know if it made him impotent, but many of his novels, including this one and A Sun Also Rises, kind of allude to that. And Hemingway did have children, so he wasn't like completely impotent, but it's something, having children doesn't mean that you don't have problems with sexual functionality or whatever. Anyway, so this novel is about really his time in World War I, and it's a beautiful kind of exploration of that time and what was actually going on, especially over on the Italian side. We never really think about what was happening with the Italians in World War I, but it's kind of a wild story with the flip-flop. But much of the story is just them talking, just him and his buddies talking about hookers or wine or whatever. But what's really cool about this novel is that it pushes this idea that for some people, and I would say for most of us, there are these moments of ecstasy, of awakening and awareness that happen that are the cornerstones of our life. And with Hemingway's minimalism, you could be reading and it all seems dumb. And there's unconscious symbolism and image patterning and some of that stuff going on. And I think that more serves as a mechanism to make us like the narrative more and draw us in over time, and not necessarily a transformative tool. But all of that minimalism and even the unconscious symbolism leads up to these moments. For instance, in this story, and I'm not going to try to spoil anything today or anything major, the main character and his lover have this moment outside. And the way Hemingway starts to write, though, in that scene explodes off the page. It's beautiful. And Hemingway says something about war and life during those passages, about this new world that we are coming into. Not this ramble about the lost generation or any of the stuff that he kind of does later on. It's this moment, it's this feeling, it's these images that he produces, and he puts it across perfectly. It encapsulates the entire war and the feeling of love and hopelessness in this world of modern machinery and death, the psychosexual death ritual of World War I, in just a moment. And it's amazing. And for me, when I look at my life is somewhat monotonous. I have an 8-month-old daughter. I go to work. I do these things, but the magical moments happen. But many of us don't let those happen. And many of us don't have the patience and are slowed down enough to see those and then let those touch us and realize those moments are what create the rest of our life and our perceptions of the world. Those are the transcendent anchors for us. And Hemingway is a master of writing these. He does it in almost every single novel. It's very subtle. But for me, this novel is transformative for the typical reasons. Yes, it talks about war. It's kind of an anti-war novel. It talks about love and all these different things. But to me, Hemingway's writing reminds me not just to come into contact with the present, but to remember all those other moments in my life, to try and find those, to try to create those more. And I encourage you guys to do the same. Like, it's available to anybody. No matter how dire your circumstances are, that moment with that subjective beauty, the perfect combination of everything for your life and then coming into it, that's what life is really about, you guys. That's what you'll remember later on. And so that's why Hemingway has that nostalgic feel to him. That's why all the boys love him. We like it because he talks about guns and hunting, and he has this detached view of women and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, he is a master of unconscious symbolism and nostalgia. And that's why people like Cormac McCarthy picked it up. Where do you think Cormac McCarthy got all this layering and unconscious symbolism stuff from? Where do you think many other great writers got it from? They got it from him. Cormac McCarthy never had any interiority in his novels, and he was a nostalgia machine. He was a symbolic machine. So thanks to Hemingway for all of that and for creating that lineage, because it's one of my favorite to write in. And so moving forward, and just as a quick reminder for those people who are new and those who are not, it's okay to be entertained. It's okay to read a purely entertaining sci-fi novel that just draws you in. That's cool. I love to do that too. But I believe that most things that you do in life should be stuff that you can integrate to make you a better person. Why wouldn't you be doing that? Are you just some static individual? Most people view themselves that way. But the novels I read, what I put my time into is making me a better man, making me a better vessel of love and light and all these things in the world. And outside of reading, that's what I try to do too. There are times when I go down the dark road. There are times when I'm sitting there pissed at the TV at some sports game. Not really. I don't get pissed at the, I don't yell. internally, I'm just like I can waste some time. I can do that. If I don't lock down my computer, I could get sucked into social media. But these pieces of work have so much to offer us, but not in the realm of knowledge and logic, not even the realm of mind-blowing, but in your cells. Because if you actually get into a novel, if you actually take this seriously and lose the logic and experience the novel for what it is, it provides you with a frame to look through reality at. And as you go through your day, if you use that frame, then it starts to embed in you. And so that's our job, you guys. Integrate this stuff, embed it. And so moving forward, what I'm going to embed into you next. And so Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy is such a wild novel. It is a Southern Gothic masterpiece. And I'm actually prepped for this discussion because during our book club, someone rightfully asked, Ian, what the hell is the point of this book? How is it transformative? Because this novel is about a brother and sister who have an incest baby, and the brother leaves it out in the woods, and they both go off on this journey to find the baby because someone finds it and it's alive. And it's dark and grim, and there's really very little hopeful elements to the novel. And so I'm always on here preaching about Cormac McCarthy being transformative. And so let me tell you guys right now why this novel is transformative. So there is a heretical offshoot of Christianity called Gnosticism. And it's a heretical offshoot of Christianity, which is a heretical offshoot of Jewish mysticism. Okay, yeah, there we go. And the quick primer is that Gnostics believe that the God of the Bible, and we're talking mostly about the Old Testament here, was not the true God, that he was actually an evil God called the Demiurge. And above that God is the real God, the God above God. And so in Gnosticism, they believe that the world was created by this demiurge. The world that we're in right now is this illusionary world created by this spiteful, wrathful God. And so we don't need to argue if this is true or not, but this is an idea that is prominent not just in the West, and it was beaten out of the West by killing the Gnostics and not letting them live out their beliefs, but in the East, the idea in Buddhism with Maya and in Hinduism of us living in this illusionary world is very prominent. And so with the two leading religions in the world, Christianity and Islam, this mindset is dead in the water. But throughout history, one could say on a global scale, this is one of the more potent ways to look at reality. This is a strong framing. Not saying that it's right. I don't really believe that any one frame is right. But viewing our reality as this kind of illusion where we are these fallen beings who have come here and we are trying through gnosis, through knowledge, to make contact again with the true God is a transformative lens because it explains so much of the craziness here on earth, but also is a kind of tool of activation for us to become better. In Eastern Orthodoxy, and somewhat in Catholicism, even though it's been muted, there is this idea of theosis, of integrating back with God, of the union with the Godhead or whatever. And in general, the West and Western religions have done not a great job of finding out the techniques to actually make that happen. Because what theosis is just another word for mystical states and inducing those. And the greatest mystical states are not created by psychedelic drugs, surprise, surprise, but actually through sober contemplation, aka meditation, and actually a combination of body, breath, and spiritual exercises. And so this idea that through actual practice, we can liberate ourselves, find a more clear perception of reality, and merge with the one energy, with the original energy, is crazy. And that it's possible because this idea is somewhat unique in mainstream Western thought and in Western religion. Obviously, if you look at people into the occult, paganism, spirituality, but the focus isn't on getting to heaven, with this mentality, but rather through gnosis, aka knowledge, trying to reconnect with God. And so what makes McCarthy really interesting is that he doesn't have these happy novels where characters actually accomplish this. If you look at his most famous novel, Blood Meridian, technically The Road's his most famous novel, but if you look at his novel, Blood Meridian, he uses countless Gnostic references, mostly in regards to the kid who is this failed messianic figure. The kid is a figure who throughout the novel, by receiving the Four of Cups, by McCarthy invoking the words Anareta, Ogdoad, by him talking about the kid falling from the stars, the Leonids, The prayer position with the woman at the end, like I won't give away everything, and I'm speaking kind of meta here, but the kid is given in that novel multiple chances to attain gnosis and break free of the illusionary world, and he actually doesn't do it. And the same kind of template is used in Outer Dark, and actually some of his other novels. It's a trope that McCarthy really likes to use. Put this tragic figure in a Gnostic world who has these opportunities to get out and awaken, but doesn't. Sutri, until kind of the end, is all about that. And I think it's really strong and really transformative because that's our reality. How many people try to do something, try to find truth in their life and don't do it? How many failed seekers of knowledge do you guys know? I personally know a lot because I've been on this path for a while. One of the most talented people I know in every single aspect of life is now like the Dark Prince. He's not only rejected truth, which I know he's seen because we have meditated before and done psychedelics before. He knows it. He knows about the illusionary world. And instead of breaking free from it, he's decided to double down on it. And I'm from Vegas, so, it's always everything and more. But he's going, he has a wife and kids, but he goes to massage parlors, every single weekend for happy endings. He's constantly cheating on her, eating terrible, lost in video games, so much. I should say cheating on his wife. And it's actually tragic to see. The worst thing in the world is not being ignorant. The worst thing in the world, the biggest prison that you can get in, is knowing that you are in a prison, knowing that there is a path out, and then settling on your slavery, saying, all right, that's okay. That's the darkest reality of all, honestly. And one of the most dangerous lifestyles. Turning your back on truth is insane because you have to go so deep into ignorance. And during that process, you have to lose so many different parts of yourself. And so many people do that to resist transformation because transformation is hard. And so that's what McCarthy is exploring in Outer Dark. He is showing another failed messianic experience through really crazy framing. This is McCarthy's most biblical book by far. There are a bunch of parables and biblical symbolism that he just takes straight from the Bible and actually inverts it. There is an inverted Trinity going on in this novel and a ton of other stuff that I won't spoil. I actually have an Outer Dark course that's probably 3 or 4 hours long, not completed yet, over on the Substack if you guys are interested in that. I have courses on most Cormac McCarthy novels that are continuously ongoing because you can never really finish it. And we also read one Cormac McCarthy book every single month in our book club. And so if you love Cormac McCarthy, then the Right Conscious Substack is the place for you. So books like this just make me feel the need to acknowledge that frame of mind, because when I'm in that frame of mind, if I feel like I just have to be an ethical person and I'm going to go to heaven, or I'm going to, my karma is going to be clean, it's okay. And it's somewhat strong, but I've honestly found that it's pretty easy to falter with that mentality. It's pretty weak for me and plenty of other people. But if I'm given a mission that I have an inaccurate perception right now, and I can learn to see more, like I've talked on this channel countless times, that's the job of the artist, to see reality more clearly, then that's something tangible. And I've found that many negative lifestyle habits and mentalities actually impede that. And so it's much easier to leave those behind with the framing that I'm trying to connect back to higher energies, or see, and if you're an atheist, see reality more clearly than, if I do this, then I'm going to be in trouble later in heaven. And so it's a really activating mentality, honestly. And it has pitfalls like any mentality. This novel also explores the idea of incest in a really cool way, which I can get into really fast right now. So why is incest a taboo? Well, you might have the knee-jerk reaction and talk about deformities, but that's actually not it. Incest is the original law. And I'm getting this theory from Levi Claude Strauss, and I really feel like it's true. It's the original law because when we were hunters and gatherers, nomads, living in small little groups, people were basically sleeping with each other. Incest was going on, right? And the first step towards civilization wasn't communicating with other groups or fighting with them or any of that. It was actually trading with other groups. But trading little small things doesn't create civilization. Like, you know how slow that is? It requires something bigger. And what's the hardest thing to trade of all? And the hardest thing to trade of all is your women. And so if you think about it, if you have a group of women in your little band of people, and there's another band and you love these people, then you have to establish relations with them and trust them at some level to exchange your women with them, because you don't want them to necessarily be exploited or any of this stuff, and maybe you want to continue to see them. And so bonds start to get created. I mean, this is what happened with the royal families and families all throughout history. You exchange family members, exchange women or men, and that makes it easier for the families to come together and get along and continue forward into the future with each other. And so apparently Strauss argues that's why it's the original taboo, because it's what makes us humans. It's what started civilization. And so when you break that, it is the ultimate sin, not just in a Christian sense, but in a total sense of humanity. And so I think that's a really cool theory. I have a whole video on this where I dive deep and talk about the theory at length over on the Substack. And so, yeah, I mean, this explores really cool ideas. And if you know how to kind of examine it, it can really help you activate, in my opinion. So next on the list, we have Yukio Mishima's The Sound of Waves, which is honestly one of his more simple and chill novels. This is just a love story without a lot of the psychological nuance of Life for Sale, Confessions of a Mask, or a lot of his earlier work. And it's interesting because a lot of people feel, and I think I would say so myself, that many of Mishima's transformative novels are the later and nihilistic, the philosophical ones. Those are the hard-hitting ones. And what's interesting about this one is that this is Mishima actually showing a positive vision of Japan. Because when you look at a lot of his works, it is kind of critiquing what happened and how we got to where we are. And it's all, like I said, nihilistic and bleak. And there's a lot of transformation to be had. But it's kind of logic bro-y. It's kind of edgelordy. It's kind of like, okay, but what's the new vision and what's the ideal? And so in this novel, which takes place right after World War II in Japan, it takes place on an island that's basically still a fishing colony. And if you guys know about fishing in Japan, it's a huge pastime. And for a while, they kept up in the economic modern world with fishing, but recently I think they are near 3 to 5% of the world's fishing, which is a huge decline for them. And so the fishing culture in Japan is slowly starting to fade away. But in this moment, in this novel, Mishima picks a perfect moment of a post-World War Japan where, parents are dead, fathers are dead, and there are certain dystopic elements to the landscape where the war or things were taking place, but things are basically still intact. The MacArthur's reconstruction, all the reconfiguration of Japan really isn't affecting them on the island yet. And so what Mishima is doing here is a nostalgic pastoral novel that wants us to look back at certain things like conformity, virtue, nature, social harmony, and view those as the highest ideal. And what's interesting about all that is that actually is the precursor a lot of the time to authoritarianism, like this, pitching this ideal world and trying to keep things as they are. And the only way you can do that is through mostly authoritarianism. And so this is a utopic novel. And I won't sit here and say that this is a bombshell transformative novel. I think that you have to read it the right way. It will help you love more. It will open you up more, which I think is awesome. But I think if you take it a little bit further and see that these values, these systems are what we need most right now, and Mishima was kind of calling for that, it really helps bring it in context. But just like what Mishima was experiencing, we are being sold this same dream, this old reality. And if you can look at it the right way, on the other side is authoritarianism, whether that's coming from the left or the right. Especially in this technological world we're in right now, where we have no connection to nature or virtue or any of these things, selling that old reality is one of the main tools of manipulation. You hear people on the right all the time talking about the old world, how things used to be, but I hear people on the left do it all the time too. Bernie Sanders will talk about how we used to live in a world where only one parent had to go to work, and his Keynesian economic policies will be able to bring America back to that again, and yada, yada, yada. And so it's just an interesting thing to contemplate that what we need most as a society is what is usually being manipulated, commodified, and turned into simulacra by the people in power who are trying to exploit that. Because in post-World War II Japan, they did not need to go into the capitalistic direction that America was pushing on them. Because how did that go? Japanese people love to go ham. And right now in Japan, their birth rate is at abysmal levels. Their suicide rates are crazy. People are depressed. People are overworked. Was that a success, or would taking a step back after the war as a society, would that have been a better plan? And Japan's just such a sad case that they were basically manipulated by what the West was doing because they wanted to survive. They knew that if they didn't start colonizing other places and become strong themselves, they were going to get colonized. And so they got drawn into these super fast industrial revolutions and all this crazy social change that other countries, underwent over hundreds of years in just a couple decades. And such a beautiful culture got sucked into Western wars and Western modes of thinking when they could have had a much nicer off-ramp. Can you imagine if Japanese culture was influenced by the West, but continued to function how it was? And slowly the idea of the emperor and these things fell off, and all the crazy stuff with the war and this big push for capitalism, all that was much more muted. It literally would be a utopia. Japan is already, a really safe place to live. And, they have some crazy politics sometimes, like all countries do. But yeah, it's just a thing to think about. Same with America. If we didn't get drawn into world wars and this crazy mindset, we could have maybe realized a more pastoral vision of America, not turning into these European cityscapes when we got to hit the restart button and we have infinitely more land. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on Sound of Waves. It's been turned into a movie multiple times. It's a fun read. It won't take you very long. And now let's move on to a much more transformative novel, which is, of course, The Brothers Karamazov. And I really like this new translation. So over here, this version is a new translation that came out last year by Michael Katz. And I have read the P&V version and I think the Garnett version. And this is by far the best. It really reads like a book. Like I have felt with many of the P&V translations of Dostoevsky that I can't really give them to other people because they're kind of a mess. But with this translation and then Katz's translation of Crime and Punishment, he also did Notes from the Underground, they're honestly much more readable. And people have argued maybe some of the nuance is lost, but I really don't think it is. The jokes actually land. I was laughing at the jokes in this that I totally missed the other times I've read this. And so just first and foremost, if you were going to read this, I would really pick up this translation because it just reads like a normal everyday novel. Like it's hard and ranty at times. And obviously there are crazy sections and all these names and callbacks that you're like, who the hell are they talking about? But that's just Dostoevsky in general. And so I don't even know where to start in the discussion of why this is a transformative novel. But Dostoevsky was way ahead of his time in terms of kind of pinpointing this idea of sensuality and sensual characters. This novel features three brothers, and one could even say four brothers, who have this insane dad who is just totally lost in this hedonistic mindset. And they all kind of feel traumatized, obviously, by that, but feel like they have that curse within them also, and they are playing it out in vastly different ways. And so Dostoevsky basically takes every trope from Shakespeare and the Bible and everything and remixes it and throws it all into one novel. There's like a little bit of everything in this, which automatically makes it kind of strong because it doesn't stick out at you like a sore thumb, like, oh, he's trying to make a commentary on natural law or something right here. But he checks every single box. And so my favorite sections of this novel are the contemplation of the question of how do you deal with the concept of evil in a world that's supposedly ruled by a benevolent God. With beginner atheists, that's always the question, right? Like, how can there be this God that apparently loves us with all this evil in the world? And there are countless arguments by Christians made about this, yada, yada, yada. You've all heard all that before. But this novel is, I'm pointing at the novel that's not here, is one of the best explorations of that idea ever, because it's not just about the questions. Once you get into apologetics or arguments about good and evil, especially through a Christian lens, it can get logic bro-y really fast. And for people who are in it, especially believers, from what I've seen, there's this certain emotional intensity because they feel like they are like justifying their life. And so the entire field is just emotionally charged a lot of the time also. Plus, there's people who've been traumatized by religion and like hate it, and they have their arguments. It's wild. And so this novel brings everything back down, brings it back to characters. Because, not to take the Jordan Peterson line that's been around forever, but you really do have to grapple with God to sustain your faith. Like if you're just a blind believer, I have no real respect for you. You really have to be contemplating these ideas. And Dostoevsky really hits on this middle ground of, if you really think about these ideas deeply, having God as a presence in your life can be really hard. But having him absent in your life can also be just as hard, if not harder. And so you're basically stuck between these two worlds where you can either reject him and life gets brutal, or you have to accept him and you have to grapple with all these crazy questions. And so Dostoevsky can really drive this point home because there is no authoritative voice in this novel. It's called polyphonic voices. Basically, all these different characters get perspectives in the novel that are pushed just as hard by Dostoevsky. For instance, Ivan in this novel is the rational atheist. Alyosha is kind of the spiritual anchor that is who is the devout Orthodox Christian. Their brother, Dmitri, is this kind of sexual deviant who is just into pleasure. Zozoma is the mystic. The bastard brother is like scientific materialism or philosophical determinism on steroids. And so you get this wide perspective of ideas, which is awesome. But then on top of that, much kind of like the Gnostic idea earlier, Dostoevsky pushes this idea that suffering is not only this curse, but something that you need to go through to have a spiritual awakening, as I've kind of been discussing throughout this video. So this book just has endless rabbit holes for transformation. I mean, I could sit and rant, and I've done it before in other videos, so I don't want to repeat the same ideas over and over again. But I absolutely loved my reread of this. It has really changed my perception on some things and really helped me kind of calm down and center myself a little bit more with my own sensuality and just the constant pursuit of not trying to be this dopamine machine that all of us are going through, or I should say kind of the pain of that. And so moving on, the next novel that I read this month or last month was Inherent Vice by Thomas Pynchon. In my previous video, 10 novels that prove Western civilization is dying, I talked about this novel for over 20 minutes. And so I will just tell you that if you are a fan of Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or the entire hippie movement, Southern California, noir, artistic fiction, this is a book for you. And there are some real transformative elements in this. So next I read Dispatches, which technically isn't a novel, but it's more like a memoir in terms of reporting on the war. But I wanted to throw it in here because this is one of the best books on Vietnam ever written. And I constantly, probably just because I'm a dude, like to kind of tap back into older wars and just read works from people who were there, including poetry, because it's just some of the most profound insights into the extremes of human suffering and ecstasy and endurance that we can find. We can hear about David Goggins, going through Hell Week 3 times, but that is nothing compared to what a lot of these guys were going through in these wars that were actually on battlefields, not just with drones and us kicking down doors and like stuff like that, but hardcore wars where you were out in the field for weeks at a time. So if you are into Vietnam, this is one of the first books that you need to read on it. So next I continued my journey into Philip K. Dick. So a couple weeks ago, I put Philip K. Dick on some lists. And I was like, I think I've only read like maybe 5 Philip K. Dick novels. I don't remember exactly. And I just saw this lying around and I was like, okay, I'm just going to read this. And so this is Valis by Philip K. Dick. And surprisingly enough, like I had no idea what was in this. I don't even know why I have this. I got it for $4 at whatever bookstore. That's probably why I was like, okay, $4. But this is actually a Gnostic novel, not to just continue ranting about Gnosticism. But in this novel, Dick explores this idea that the universe is living information. But if that's true, then who actually controls it? And so the idea of this novel is that we are all living in this false system. And so in Gnosticism, there is a figure named Sophia. So in the Gnostic cosmology, there is this one God, and then there's this break off of energy, and there's like all these other archons or lower energies that's, broke off. And one of those was named Sophia, which is like kind of the divine feminine principle. And from her, actually, a break off of her is the demiurge, the he god in the Bible, according to Gnostics, that created this illusionary world. But in this novel, the liberating force of salvation is this girl named Sophia. It's so funny. And so there's a ton of other metaphors in this, but I really like this because it's much more direct. As I was talking about earlier, Outer Dark, and how it's like you got to kind of read between the lines and like have a unique perspective to kind of activate with the novel. But something like this basically lays it all out. This is basically a novel guidebook to Gnosticism without it like preaching to you, because I don't really think Philip K. Dick was a Gnostic. This novel basically, if you are interested in ideas like time is an illusion, the Roman Empire never ended, if you are into conspiracies, if you believe that Christ is real and he is here on earth right now, but not as Jesus Christ himself, but appearing in different forms. I mean, there's that. There's this idea that we're living in a fake world, and especially that there is a true God out there somewhere that breaks through to us only sometimes. This novel also kind of can bend into like simulation theory and stuff. Then this is a novel for you. It's pretty well written. It is somewhat of its time, and we've kind of like moved on in terms of our conceptualizations, but at some level we haven't. Because once again, being able to talk about these things in a novel, in an artistic form, is better than arguing, are we really in a simulation? What kind of simulation? Who runs it? Like all those questions. Instead, Dick just moves around all that and focuses on experiences in this novel. And so, boom, there it is, everyone. Those are the novels I read for the month. I read a lot of articles, nonfiction, stuff on Substack. That was really awesome. And so I hope you guys like this video. I hope you guys continue to read. If you guys want to support me and the channel, there is no better place to do it than joining the Substack. I would like to thank each and every one of you guys for being here, and I will see you in the next video.